Have you ever met someone who made you feel intensely wanted, only to suddenly become emotionally distant? One day they're obsessed with you. Constant texts, affection, attention, validation. You feel chosen, important, safe. And then suddenly, they pull away. Their energy changes. Their replies become colder. You feel the emotional distance instantly, and somehow, that inconsistency makes you want them even more. You replay conversations in your head, check your phone constantly, analyze every little change in tone. You wonder, what happened? Did I do something wrong? Why am I becoming obsessed with someone who confuses me? But this isn't just emotional, it's psychological. Hot and cold behavior can actually affect your brain chemistry, nervous system, attachment style, and emotional identity. And once you understand why, you'll never see these relationships the same way again. The human brain becomes addicted to unpredictable rewards. This psychological concept is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's one of the strongest forms of conditioning that exists. In fact, it's the same psychological mechanism behind gambling addiction. When rewards become inconsistent, the brain becomes hyper-focused, because uncertainty creates obsession. If someone is always loving, predictable, and emotionally available, your nervous system eventually relaxes. But when affection becomes unpredictable, your brain stays alert, waiting, hoping, searching for emotional certainty. That's why hot and cold behavior feels addictive. The inconsistency creates emotional anxiety, and your brain mistakes that anxiety for emotional importance. You begin craving the return of the good version of them, the affectionate version, the emotionally available version. And every small moment of affection suddenly feels incredibly rewarding, even if the relationship itself is hurting you. This creates a powerful emotional loop: attention, withdrawal, anxiety, relief, repeat. And over time, your emotional state becomes controlled by their inconsistency. The hot phase often feels magical. This is when they give intense attention, compliment you, constantly mirror your personality, make you feel deeply understood, create emotional closeness very quickly. Your brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, emotional anticipation. You begin emotionally attaching to the feeling they create. And for many people, this phase feels healing, especially if you grew up feeling emotionally neglected, abandoned, unseen, rejected, unworthy of love. The attention feels like emotional relief, like someone finally sees you, finally chooses you. And that emotional intensity can feel like love. But intensity and safety are not the same thing. Sometimes people confuse emotional highs with emotional connection. But real connection is stable, not emotionally chaotic. And many toxic relationships begin with emotional intensity because intensity accelerates attachment. The faster someone becomes emotionally important to you, the harder it becomes to detach later. Then comes the emotional withdrawal, the delayed responses, the emotional distance, the confusion. You feel the shift immediately, and suddenly, your nervous system goes into survival mode. You begin overthinking, obsessing, checking your phone repeatedly, feeling emotionally unsafe, needing reassurance, and blaming yourself. Your body starts reacting as if connection itself is threatened. And for people with anxious attachment, this can feel unbearable. Because inconsistency activates abandonment wounds. The brain starts searching desperately for answers. What changed? How do I get them back? How do I fix this? But the more emotionally unavailable they become, the harder you often try. And that's where many people accidentally abandon themselves. They ignore red flags, lower boundaries, accept emotional breadcrumbs, because they're chasing the return of emotional certainty, not realizing the inconsistency itself is creating the addiction. Not everyone who acts hot and cold is consciously manipulative. Sometimes it comes from avoidant attachment, fear of intimacy, unresolved trauma, emotional immaturity, Insecurity, narcissistic traits. Some people crave closeness until it becomes emotionally real. Then vulnerability scares them, so they pull away. Others intentionally create emotional inconsistency to maintain control, because emotionally confused people become easier to emotionally influence. The uncertainty keeps you emotionally invested. You spend more energy trying to understand them than asking whether the relationship is actually healthy. And many people mistake emotional instability for passion, because chaos creates emotional intensity. But healthy love does not require confusion to feel exciting. Real emotional safety can actually feel unfamiliar to people who grew up around inconsistency. Sometimes peace feels boring, only because chaos became emotionally normal. This is where trauma bonds begin forming. A trauma bond is not simply attachment, it's attachment created through cycles of pain and relief. The person hurting you also becomes the person temporarily relieving the pain, which creates emotional dependency. Your brain starts associating them with both anxiety and comfort, and that emotional contradiction creates powerful attachment. That's why leaving emotionally inconsistent people can feel like withdrawal, because your nervous system became chemically attached to the cycle itself. You're not weak. Your brain adapted to emotional unpredictability. But healing begins when you stop confusing emotional suffering with emotional depth, because love should not constantly destabilize your nervous system. Healing starts with awareness. The moment you recognize the pattern, you begin taking your emotional power back. You stop chasing people who only value you when they fear losing you. You stop begging for consistency from emotionally unavailable people. You stop shrinking yourself for temporary affection. And most importantly, you begin learning what healthy love actually feels like. Healthy love is consistent, emotionally safe, calm, stable, honest, reassuring, not perfect, but emotionally secure. And one of the hardest truths is this: sometimes your attraction to emotionally unavailable people has less to do with chemistry and more to do with familiarity. Your nervous system may be chasing what feels emotionally familiar, even when it hurts, but awareness interrupts the cycle. And eventually, peace becomes more attractive than emotional chaos. If this video resonated with you, you are not alone. Psychology gives us clarity, and clarity helps break emotional confusion. Because sometimes healing begins the moment you finally realize you were never asking for too much consistency. You were asking the wrong person.